Undercover boss orders breakfast, freezes when waitress says she's been living off coffee. Monday morning, rain poured down in torrents. Gray streaks of water ran down the car windows, blurring the view of a city just waking up. A black car stopped across from Sunrise Diner, branch number 28, one of the outlets rated as most efficient, according to the internal reports of the Sunrise Restaurant Group. But Derek Langston, CEO of the entire chain, had never fully trusted numbers. Today, he wasn't coming as an executive. No tailored suit, no assistant following behind. Just a middle-aged man in a coarse fabric coat and a pulled-down knit hat, walking into the diner like any other unfamiliar customer. The moment he stepped through the door, Derek immediately sensed something was off. The diner was busy. Nearly every table was full. The sounds of cutlery clinking against plates, the steady hum of the coffee machine, and the faint aroma of freshly baked pastries filled the air. Everything on the surface played out like the perfect script for a successful morning. But beneath that synchronized shell was an atmosphere heavy as damp mist. No one was chatting, no laughter, not even a pat on the back exchanged among coworkers. Cassie, a petite waitress with hastily tied back hair, moved nonstop between tables, her tray always loaded. She handled nearly half the floor alone, serving food, clearing dishes, refilling coffee, still trying to smile. But the deep hollows under her eyes, the kind only exhaustion could carve, gave her away. Meanwhile, her two male colleagues, own blonde, the other wearing glasses, leaned casually against the counter, sipping coffee and chatting about last night's game. Every so often, they burst into loud laughter, recounting a legendary play, completely ignoring the order bell ringing from the far end of the dining area. Derek chose a table by the window quiet, with a good view. He sat down, picked up a menu but didn't read it, his eyes silently taking in every little detail. He didn't know exactly what he was going to find, but his instincts, the same ones that had never failed him in all his years, were telling him this. Something was wrong here, and it wasn't in the financial reports. It wasn't in the productivity rankings. It was in the way a worn-out girl still tried to serve with care, and in the way everyone else treated it as normal. A plate of eggs and toast was gently set in front of Derek. Cassie gave a faint smile, a slight bow before turning away, but Derek spoke softly, stopping her. "Thank you. Looks like it's a busy day, huh?" Cassie paused briefly, then turned toward him, still keeping a thin smile on her lips, the polite smile of someone far too used to hiding exhaustion behind the bare minimum of courtesy. "Yes, it's Monday morning. Everyone stops by for a quick bite before work." Derek nodded slightly. He looked down at his now cold cup of coffee, then glanced at the plastic cup in Cassie's hand, only half filled with plain black coffee. A small detail, but it revealed so much. "Have you had breakfast yet?" he asked, his voice even and sincere, free from any performative curiosity. Cassie was slightly startled, then gave a half-hearted laugh. "I don't eat breakfast, I survive on coffee." The response came out reflexively, as if from habit, but within her tone was the truth, no embellishment, no complaint, no appeal for pity. Just reality. Derek frowned slightly. He didn't press further, choosing instead to wait. And Cassie, perhaps sensing for the first time that someone was truly listening, let out a quiet breath and whispered, like confessing a forbidden secret, "Morning shifts are the worst for tips, especially when we split them, but only certain people actually get them." Derek looked up at her. His gaze remained calm, but deep within, a chill ran down his spine. She didn't know who she was speaking to, didn't realize the man sitting in front of her wasn't just a kind customer. He was the one who owned this entire restaurant chain. And she certainly didn't know that the offhand comment she just made, floating lightly into the rush of a busy morning, would become the first spark to ignite a truth long buried inside the familiar kitchen of Sunrise Diner number 28. Derek's second cup of coffee cooled quickly, not because of the weather, but because he was too focused on observing. Cassie moved like a shuttle between the tables, taking orders, serving dishes, clearing plates, refilling coffee, responding to special requests, all with an impressively smooth rhythm. In less than 10 minutes, Derek counted she was simultaneously serving 12 tables. Meanwhile, on the other side of the diner, the two male staffers in matching uniforms were each hovering around just 4 tables. They chatted leisurely, tapped their phones behind the counter, and only occasionally strolled out, usually with a POS device in hand, like their job was simply to show up when it's time to swipe a card. Derek quickly noticed the odd pattern. Whenever a customer paid by card, one of the two men would instantly appear. Even if Cassie had handled the table from start to finish, she would always step aside, letting them process the payment. No complaints, no looks of resentment. It was just the familiar silence. The unspoken assignment of roles. And then, Derek decided to test his suspicion. He left a tip via card when paying. One of the two male employees promptly came over, swiped the card, gave a polite, perfectly standard smile, then stepped away as if he'd never been there. That very afternoon, inside his private car, parked a few blocks from the diner, Derek logged into the POS management system with the highest level of access one only he possessed. After just a few steps, the truth became crystal clear. All tip transactions under $15 did not record the name of the server. Instead, the system automatically assigned them to a single ID, R. Langford. Derek sat up straight. R. Langford, short for Ryan Langford, the nephew of Doug Hayes, the manager of branch number 28, a system patch, manually installed, bypassing approval from headquarters. A side note attached: optimize cash flow, streamline morning shift. But that cash flow optimization benefited no one except the one assigned to handle the POS machine. Cassie Etha, one working herself to the bone, had no system access, no POS ID. She was completely invisible in the reports. She didn't exist in the tip logs, didn't appear in any allocation records. She only existed on the floor, between heavy trays and the soles of worn-out shoes. Derek closed his laptop. In the rearview mirror, he saw his own reflection, his eyes no longer those of a mere customer, but of a man about to expose a truth buried far too long beneath printed receipts. And this time, he wasn't going to let it pass by like some silent stream of tips. He would call the injustice by its name, and he would begin with the very numbers others thought he'd never bother to check. Derek leaned on the edge of his seat, eyes locked on the laptop screen, still showing the breakdown of that morning's transactions. One figure caught his attention in particular: 726 transactions in the past 6 weeks, almost all with tips, but over 89% of them logged under a single IDR. Langford. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a system, deliberately engineered. He dug deeper into the update history of the patch, titled Patch 3. 1. POS Optimization. Labeled Internal, Not Disclosed. Installation date, 6 weeks ago. Approved by Doug Hayes. The note consisted of a single sentence: simplify transaction processing, avoid wasting time entering employee IDs for small tip amounts. Derek was stunned. While Cassie ran herself ragged serving 12 tables, Ryan, the guy sipping iced tea behind the coffee counter, was quietly absorbing all the tips that should have belonged to her. And Doug, the very man who once sat with Derek during a corporate culture orientation session, passionately advocating for building trust from the ground up, was the one who had signed off on this fraud. Derek took a deep breath, his finger tapping lightly on the leather-trimmed wood beside him. He wasn't just looking at a technical error. He was witnessing a moral breach in a place supposedly built on the value of respecting the earliest shift workers. Cassie had never complained, but now he understood why her quiet words had weighed so heavily on his mind. I survive on coffee. That sentence, simple, soft-spoken, was a silent cry for help, a living testament to a system choking honesty, hard work, and the endurance of those who should have been the most appreciated. He picked up his phone and dialed Julia, the senior head of HR. Julia, I need internal audit at branch 28 by 6:30 a.m. this Friday. No prior notice. Have all materials read, especially anything tied to the POS system. Yes. Is there something serious going on? Not serious, Derek replied, his voice dropping. It's disgraceful, and I want every line of data pulled, every allocation, every transaction, all of it. Will you be attending in person? Number, I'll be leading it. He ended the call. In the rearview mirror, the rain had stopped. The final droplets clinging to the glass slid down, carrying away dust, and the fading reflection of a man who once believed that rules alone were enough to keep a system clean. Turns out, sometimes, only being present at the right moment can expose what's hidden beneath the facade of strong performance and friendly staff. Oh, and Hederick Langston would walk into the coming Friday morning, not for breakfast, but to restore fairness, item by item, starting from a cold cup of coffee and a girl who hadn't been seen for far too long. Friday morning, the sky turned suddenly clear after many days of dreary rain. But inside Sunrise Diner branch number 28, a real storm was waiting to be unleashed. 6:28 a.m. The glass door swung open. No more beanie, no more worn-out coat. Derek Langston entered the diner as himself, a seasoned CEO, composed, commanding, and needing no introduction. Following him were Julia from HR, 2 internal audit officers, and the head of the tech department, A few early customers were quietly eating. The staff froze. Some exchanged nervous glances. And Duck, the branch manager, stepped out from his office, forcing a smile. "Mr. Langston, this is quite a surprise." "Not a surprise," Derek cut in. "I came exactly on time, just like the truth does." He nodded to Julia. A small speaker was placed on the counter. A click. Then silence followed by familiar yet chilling voices. "Just set anything under $15 to Ryan's ID by default. Cassie doesn't have system access anyway, don't worry. Works harder? Tough luck. Customers can't track it. Staff? They don't know either." Doug froze. Ryan, pouring himself a coffee behind the counter, dropped his spoon onto the floor. Derek lifted his phone, projecting the POS report onto a screen. Patch 3.1, Notes, Optimize Morning Cash Flow. Approved by D.W. Hayes. Solati Precipient ID R. Langford. Derek looked straight at Doug, his voice low but sharp as a blade slicing through pretense. "You approved it. You installed it. Your nephew took the money. And the ones who worked the hardest, running 12 tables in a shift, got nothing. You didn't just cheat the system. You betrayed my trust. And you betrayed the people who should have been at the top of the payroll, not erased from it altogether." Doug stammered, trying to defend himself. But Derek raised a hand decisively. "No explanations needed. You're relieved of your management duties. Effective immediately. Ryan, your ID is deactivated. Both of you will work with the legal department today." No one clapped. No one whispered. But no one looked down anymore either. A brief silence. Then, from behind the counter, Cassie stepped forward. Still the same apron. Still the same worn-out shoes. But this time, she walked slowly, head held high, her eyes steady, unwavering. Derek saw a genuine light in those eyes. No more exhaustion. No more resignation. Only the quiet strength of someone who had endured long enough and was still strong enough not to stay silent. "Cassie," he called. She stopped and gave a slight respectful nod. "Thank you for speaking up." Cassie smiled. Not shy, not hesitant. She didn't notice the entire diner turning their gaze toward her. And even if she had, she no longer had anything to hide from. Because on that morning, it wasn't the report, it wasn't the audio recording, it was Cassie herself who stood as the clearest proof of what Derek had always believed. That a system may be veiled by lies, but the truth, no matter how small, will always find its way to the light. Derek turned, his eyes sweeping across the diner. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the usual clinking of plates and cutlery had gone silent, like someone had pressed a pause button on the entire room. Julia from HR began reading the official statement in a voice that was clear and without hesitation. Per the directive of CEO Derek Langston, branch manager Doug Hayes, and employee Ryan Langford are hereby suspended from all access to the POS system, the income distribution platform, and the internal HR infrastructure of Sunrise Restaurant Group, effective immediately. Ryan stepped back, his eyes wide with panic, looking to Doug for some kind of rescue. But Doug had nothing left to offer. He stood there, hands gripping the edge of the counter, eyes staring blankly into space, like a man waking from a dream and suddenly realizing he was falling with no idea why. One of the kitchen staff slowly removed his apron, folding his arms as he leaned against the walk-in freezer door, eyes fixed on Doug. There was no anger. No bitterness, just finality. As if someone had finally done the right thing, something they had all been waiting for months. And then, from behind the counter, Cassie stepped forward. She didn't rush. Every step was deliberate, solid, as if each one was laying the first bricks of a new foundation. Several staff members looked up at Herselent, but full of understanding. They knew, and she knew, that this wasn't just the first morning without Doug and Ryan. It was the first morning where someone like Cassie finally stepped out of the shadows. Derek called her name again, his voice lower, steadier. "Cassie." She stopped, still wearing the old uniform, apron still stained with dried coffee, and those same familiar worn-out shoes. But her eyes, those eyes no longer belonged to someone simply enduring. They were the eyes of a survivor stepping out from the rubble steady, clear, and unshielded. "Thank you for speaking up," Derek said, slow but firm. Cassie looked at him briefly, then nodded. "Not because I'm braver than anyone else, but because I couldn't take another morning with only coffee." That response sent a subtle ripple through the room. A soft sigh from someone in the kitchen, the quiet clink of a coffee cup settling onto a saucer by the window. But no one broke the solemnity of that moment. Cassie turned to face the scattered staff around the diner. She said nothing, but her steps carried a silent promise: things will change. And Derek, he just stood there, quietly watching, needing no further report. Because that morning, He hadn't just witnessed the collapse of an abusive system. He had seen something far greater, that sometimes change doesn't start with grand speeches or corporate strategies behind glass doors. It begins with one person and one small truth dared to be spoken in the middle of an ordinary morning. And a girl who once lived on coffee had become the reason an entire empire had to reckon with itself. 1 month later, a gentle sunlight coated the narrow street like a layer of translucent glaze, warm, but not blinding. The almond tree in front of Sunrise Diner number 28 had started to bud, as if it too could feel something was being reborn from within. Derek parked across the street, removed his sunglasses, and stepped out without haste. No disguise, no silence. This time, he hadn't come to investigate. He came to witness what happens when the truth is finally spoken. The glass door swung open. The familiar chime rang out, but this time not as a reminder of gloom, but as the overture to a truly peaceful day. Right beside the cashier's counter stood a brand new digital board framed in light oak. On it, a message scrolled steadily: tip sharing policy, 100% transparent, 100% fair, 100% earned. At the bottom, in smaller engraved letters, a system only matters when even the quietest person is seen. Cassie stepped out from behind the counter. No more apron, no more dried coffee stains. She wore a crisp white shirt, her hair neatly tied up, and a new name tag that gleamed under the morning light. Cassie Moore, general manager. Her face radiated confidence. No more dark circles, no more timidness. Instead, a calm, self-assured gaze full of awareness of the position she now held. "Good morning, Mr. Langston," she smiled, her voice no longer trembling. Derek nodded, walking slowly through the dining area. He quietly observed the new staff being trained by Cassie, how to position trays correctly, how to truly listen to guests' requests, and how to say thank you with their eyes. The young kitchen helper who once didn't dare speak up now packed vegetables while whistling cheerfully. A leave schedule board hung behind the kitchen, each name listed clearly, with specific hours and signed confirmations. No one was forgotten. No one erased from the system. Cassie invited Derek to sit at the same table by the window, the very one he had sat at a month earlier, when a cold breeze passed over a lukewarm coffee cup and a girl quietly whispered about a fatigue. No one noticed. Now, the coffee was brought out hot, and the person who served it was her, but in an entirely different role. "Thank you for coming back," Cassie said. Derek looked at the display board, at the rhythm of the diner in motion, and gently smiled. "Number, thank you for preserving the most important thing." Cassie tilted her head. "What is that?" He looked straight into her eyes, his gaze deep but glowing. "Trust, dignity, and the courage to speak up, even when no one thinks your voice matters." A breeze brushed against the window, lightly shifting the pale curtain. And in that moment, Derek realized, a restaurant can be built with bricks, menus, and systems. But for it to truly come alive, it needs people brave enough to speak the truth, even if their only meal was a cold cup of coffee. Derek gently pushed the glass door open. The bell above rang again, this time not lonely, but like a familiar greeting. The diner no longer carried the weight it once had. The space seemed to breathe easier, clearer, even though the furniture was still the same old wooden tables, just freshly varnished. On the wall near the cashier's counter, a new photo frame had appeared. It was a group photo of the entire current staff, each person in proper uniform, eyes bright and full of energy. At the center stood Cassie, resting one hand lightly on the table, her smile gentle and honest, like the sunlight pouring through the windows that morning. Right beneath the photo, etched into a brushed brass plaque, was the inscription, "A new day doesn't begin when the doors open, but when everyone knows they are seen." Derek smiled, then glanced around. An elderly customer was being gently assisted by a young employee who patiently repeated the menu 3 times in a calm voice. In the kitchen, a chef pointed to the stove, showing the junior cook how to control the flame so the pancake crust wouldn't burn. No shouting, no rushing. It was a kind of peace, orderly and filled with humanity more than any service rating could ever measure. Cassie, now behind the counter, was briefly reviewing the table assignments with the 2 morning shift staff. She caught Derek watching her and came over, her smile so natural one could hardly believe this was the same woman who once scraped by on cold coffee. "Good morning, Mr. Langston," she said, her tone steady and relaxed, as though he were just a regular. "Would you like your usual table?" Derek chuckled softly. Maybe this time the coffee won't go cold. Cassie led him back to the table by the window, the very one he had sat at silently a month ago, in a crowded but quiet diner. The table had been polished, The chair was no longer wobbly, and on the edge, a small brass plaque had been affixed. Every story has a turning point. This was ours. Cassie set down the coffee, steaming hot, rich, and aromatic. I remember you once said the most important things in a restaurant aren't on the menu. Back then, I didn't quite understand. Derek picked up the cup, inhaling deeply. And now? Cassie smiled. Now I do. It's when you dare to speak up without needing to raise your voice. A new staff member passed by, bowing slightly to Derek with respectful eyes. Not because he was the CEO, but because the woman standing before them, Cassie Moore, had shown them that true power doesn't always come from a title, but from doing the right thing before anyone else does. Derek turned toward the window, gazing at the almond tree outside. The early sunlight gently lit the young buds, glistening as they danced in the breeze. He spoke softly, almost as a whisper to himself. A restaurant can be built from bricks, from systems, from menus. But for it to truly be alive, it needs people brave enough to speak the truth, even if all they've had is a cold cup of coffee. Sometimes, an ordinary breakfast, just eggs, toast, and a cup of coffee, can reveal an entire system of injustice that's existed silently for far too long. Not because of the food, but because of the exhausted eyes of a server, because of the quiet reply, "I just survive on coffee, sir." But what changed everything wasn't the arrival of a boss. It was the courage of someone who dared to speak the truth, even when no one believed her voice had weight. Because real change doesn't begin with a shout. It begins with a whisper honest enough to make people listen.